Perfect. Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Connection Conference. Day 1 was filled with action-packed sessions, and day 2 is no different. We're kicking it off in no better place with a morning of Slate. My name's Adam Parker here with Carnegie. As we all know, Slate is taking over the world of higher education with its endless functionality and customization capability. Therefore, I'm excited to discuss making accessibility accessible in Slate with Carnegie's own Nick Porcella and Dylan Schnechtel. Before we get started, I want to share a few quick housekeeping tips. As you know, if you attended day 1, these sessions are recorded and will be distributed after. I will direct all questions in chat into the Whova apps functionality on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the session, and with time permitting, we'll hopefully answer a lot of those questions in the end. I do want to start off this conference with a little bit of chat session engagement, so feel free to drop in where you are listening in from in that chat section to get the day kicked off here. Finally, we encourage you to be social during these sessions. Engage with us on all your social channels and tag Carnegie HQ with any key takeaways. With that, I'm excited to pass this session over to Nick and Dylan.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for joining today. We're both Dylan and I are really excited to chat about making accessibility accessible in Slate. So some brief intros first. Again, my name is Nick Porcella. I am the Senior Slate Training Strategist with Carnegie. I am the industrious and meticulous philosopher, pink, green, maroon. We can tell you more about how that works offline. But really excited to chat accessibility, and I'll pass it over to Dylan before we dive in.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dylan Schnechtel. I am a Slate technical strategist in the Slate optimization division at Carnegie. My role on our team focuses primarily on building Slate portals for a variety of audiences, and that means that accessibility is a really critical part of the work that I do every day. So I'm very excited to be here with Nick to dive into accessibility in Slate with y'all.
And Dylan and I are both very serious about accessibility, but it doesn't mean we can't have a little fun along the way. So you will definitely see us throughout our presentation take a few different approaches to sort of build empathy amongst a group here today. So really excited to sort of show you slides that look broken, but actually aren't. So on all stages, we're looking to make things more accessible. We'll chat with you about what that is, what that means, how it impacts Slate, so on and so forth. But first, before we really begin any conversation about accessibility, we like to talk about our guiding principle. This is one that I think a lot of folks who work in accessibility, even beyond Slate, use. But simply stated, designs created to benefit people with disabilities will benefit a much larger user group. So the work that we're going to be talking about today is just good for everybody.
So before we dive into the meat of the presentation, we just wanted to give you all an overview of what you can expect during our time together today. So we'll begin with a quick summary of what accessibility is, what the topic encompasses, and why we should all care about it. And then we'll transition to speaking about accessibility specifically as it pertains to Slate and the way that we engage audiences through that platform. Following that, Nick will walk us through some brief empathy exercises to really help drive home the importance of accessibility work, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the session.
So starting us off a little bit about what are we talking about today? Accessibility 101. So obviously this is a large topic that encompasses far more than Slate, and this is global in its approach. But when we're thinking about accessibility, we're simply trying to keep information and media and design available for everybody to use, regardless of whether they have visual impairment, physical disability, cognitive differences, whatever it may be. And at Carnegie, we like to think of this in terms of why should we care about accessibility for 4 different reasons: required, ethical, practical, powerful. So a very brief snapshot of what each of these encapsulates. First of all, everything that Dylan and I will chat with you about today is required. It is required by law in the United States. Most other countries have similar laws to them. We're talking about in the US things like the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, talking about the WCAG standards, web content accessibility guidelines, and some other things like CAN-SPAM. So more to come on that soon. Also, everything we're chatting about today is through the ethical lens. So we know that a lot of colleges, especially, put a great deal of effort into being inclusive spaces, and inclusive needs to include everybody, truly everyone, including folks who need accommodations on the web. Thirdly, everything that we're going to talk about today is practical. So to give you a brief example that we'll touch on later, this goes back to our guiding principle. Work that we do in accessibility to make things more up to code, better standards for folks who have disabilities is better for everyone. So think, for example, I can guarantee at some point in your life, no matter who you are, you have had to zoom in on your phone or your computer to see small text or to read a menu or something. Giving your content the ability to magnify successfully and have the lines not blur together is good for everybody. And finally, powerful. What we really like to talk about at Carnegie is that the work you're doing in accessibility can also just help you in general. We know that admissions offices are always looking to get that 1 or 5% leg up from the previous year in any way possible. Did you know, for example, that captioning and putting transcripts with your videos is not only good for folks who need them, but it's also good for your search engine optimization. So something like Google will better index your site and push you more towards the top. So required, ethical, practical, powerful.
All right. A significant amount of the accessibility work that we can do in Slate happens in the source code of emails and portals. So you see that source button kind of circled at the top of this slide. Those of you who have worked in source code before or have even just clicked that button to take a peek, know that there's a lot of HTML and CSS and other code that's working behind the scenes of deliver mailings and portal content specifically. You may feel a little bit intimidated by source code, and that's totally okay. But Nick and I are here to tell you that source code is one of your biggest allies when it comes to accessibility work within Slate. Many of our upcoming examples will deal with specific elements of source code, but that does not mean in any way that accessibility work is only suitable for Slate users with advanced coding skills. At the end of this session today, we really hope that each one of you understands a little bit more about what's happening under the hood of your Slate instance, and that you feel empowered to click that source button and implement some of these accessibility recommendations.
So let's talk about Slate. And I know that we had a poll beforehand. I'm currently not able to see the results since we started, but I know in some of you who submitted beforehand, we had a mix. We had a good group of people who are completely fresh and new to accessibility in Slate or in general. And we had some folks who classify themselves as experts who are just learning to see where do they fall currently. So we're going to start with some Slate tools that you can implement and go from there.
All right, we're going to start with the title element. So when an individual interacts with an email or a portal that you've built in Slate using assistive technology, the title element is one of the first pieces of information that their assistive device will communicate to them when they interact with that page. This element also serves as the label for any tab that the current user has open in their browser. So it really helps to provide context and navigation support to users as they interact with your email and portal content. In Slate, we can control the title element in deliver communications and portals in both the source code, which you can see kind of highlighted at the bottom of this slide, and in any portal methods that we build, and that's represented in the middle of this slide. In source code, the title element is indicated by 2 title tags, which you can see again in that kind of highlighted code at the bottom. Any text between that opening and closing tag will be read out as the title of your email or the portal page by an assistive device. And again, will help give your audience context about the content that they've received or the portal that they have open in their browser and are engaging with. When we configure a portal method, you have the option to enter title text in the page title field that you can see. That page title here is Carnegie Test Portal. Any text entered here, again, is the title element of the portal view that method is connected to. And this is a really easy setting to accidentally overlook when building a portal, but it is a critical component of the overall accessibility of your portal to all users. So the top portion of this slide really illustrates the importance of the title element, especially as a label for browser tabs. So if you're someone like me who often has a dozen tabs open at once. Seeing a string of numbers as a label for each of those tabs, like you can see in these first 4 at the top, that would likely cause a lot of confusion as you tried to navigate through your open browser. But if your tabs were labeled in a clear and descriptive manner with the title element, like this All Scholarships tab that we see, you would likely be able to navigate through your tabs with much more ease and efficiency. So this is a benefit for sighted users as well as individuals who are using assistive technology. That title element ultimately supports all of us, all users, not just individuals who are utilizing screen readers. It helps us all position ourselves within web content and navigate with more ease.
I'll also point out here we have a language element, English, which is going to become apparent right now. And so this is sort of our next topic here is always making sure that you've indicated what language your content is in. And that is regardless of if you have multiple languages of content in your mailing in Slate or on your portal or on your webpage, even outside the world of Slate. But it also could be just if you have one language, it's important. Reason being is screen readers are just one example of an assistive technology that Dylan had just mentioned, and they will actually accommodate for accents. I am not a French speaker. I had a colleague write this for me. I believe it translates something to the effect of, if you read this with an English accent, your audience may be horrified or even offended. And this is sort of the mentality here is showing the level of care to your audience that you are trying to meet them where they are. We see a lot of schools nowadays send out a mailing in English to a student, but maybe they have a sizable portion of their audience who speak another language. And so if you're emailing parents in a Spanish language email, you would want to put lang equals double quotations ES, Espanol, just to make sure that the screen reader is pronouncing things correctly and just overall keeping that good user experience. So this is an easy one. If you don't do this already, just add lang equals en if it's in English somewhere in your header CSS.
All right, presentation roles. This is a fun one. So before we discuss presentation roles, it's important to remember that all of the HTML that we see in the source code of our emails and portal content and this snippet of content on the slide as well, all of that code is used not only to position text content visually in our emails and portals, but also to communicate information about how relevant text is grouped together on a page, the relationship between text and images, and what elements are ultimately critical to understanding page content, as opposed to being kind of decorative or design related only. So the presentation role, or role equals presentation, that attribute is used to essentially hide HTML content from screen readers and other assistive technologies by removing semantics, so extraneous code, while still preserving the content's meaning. It's a little hard to wrap your head around maybe, but to illustrate why presentation roles are important, I'm going to just read out this block of text that you see in front of you. Want to learn more about our art department? Table align equals cell center, cell padding equals 0, cell spacing equals 0, class equals 0, style equals table left spacing 0 point, table right spacing 0 point, border collapse, border spacing 0 pixels, table layout fixed, exclamation point important with 100%. Did anyone in the room keep track of what that content was trying to communicate? Because I was reading it and I totally lost track of it. Do you think that any user who heard that read out to them would be able to track what you were trying to communicate to them? Probably not. So if all of the HTML behind that content had included a presentation role attribute, this role equals presentation or role equals none that we see on the slide, the screen reader would have omitted all of the superfluous information about the layout and the styling and the table wrapping that text, and would have read out only the information that was truly important to the user. So in this case, the question, want to learn more about our art department. The presentation role would preserve the meaning of that content, but hide those additional semantics, the code that we really don't care about, and ultimately would have just streamlined the user experience and would have made sure that the most important content is the content that's being delivered to them.
One of my favorite things to talk about for accessibility is alt text. And like many topics, we could easily do a deep dive and spend several hours on this. So we're going to give you the SparkNotes version today. But when you're thinking about the types of media that you're using in your Slate emails, your portals, or just your web pages, think that there are three types of information that you can convey via media. There's informational, functional, and decorative. And luckily, the names all give you quite a bit of clues into what each of those things mean and do. Let's start at the top. Informational media. You should always have alt text for informational media. But first, what is alt text? Alt text is, of course, shorthand for alternative text. This is what will display either for a screen reader for somebody who cannot see an image, or as I'd like to get us into the mindset of, this is for anybody who either can't or has disabled the ability to view images. And for example, we see a lot of students in more rural communities who have lower access to high bandwidth internet actually disable the images from downloading because it allows them to get to content faster. So really for anybody, I'm sure other folks have just encountered a time where you were unable to load something. Maybe the image file was absolutely huge and you were at the airport and the internet was pretty poor. Alt text allows you to convey that meaning instead of seeing a giant red X and not even knowing what the information is. So this is important for the first two, especially informational and functional. I like to think of this as, if this content were completely gone, would meaning be lost from what you're trying to deliver? Informational, in theory, yes, you would be losing some meaning. So you need to apply alt text here. What's very empowering, though, is that while alt text is necessary, if we took a group of 100 people, they might come up with 80 different versions of the alt text for this photo, and that's okay. There are certainly nuances. You don't have to be specific. The importance is that you have alt text. So one example of many that could work here is stone arch entryway to the college campus with gardens of ivy on either side. I might even shorten that further, but that's one idea. The second type of media would be functional. Again, as the name implies, this is any media that is serving a functional purpose. So for instance, a button. Now, buttons don't have to be images. They can be hard-coded, but if you're using images or buttons as images, you should also be applying alt text that not only indicates what the media is, but what it's going to do, what it's going to function as. So in the example here, one option could be apply now button linking to the apply page. And then last but not least, here at the bottom, decorative media. Now, decorative media is a little different, and in fact, you should not include alt text with decorative media. That's more of just a stylistic entity where you don't want all the information cluttered up and bogging people down as they're navigating your pages. So in this case, we just have a maroon photo corner. If that were missing from the body of an email, there'd be no meaning that was lost from that. And so typically with decorative media, we do not include alt text. That is the established best practice.
Okay, so up to this point, Nick and I have covered recommendations of things you should include or should do in order to make Slate more accessible to your audiences. The title attribute that we'll talk about is an example of something you generally should not include in your source code. I do want to clarify that the title attribute is not the same as the title element that I spoke about earlier. The title attribute was originally designed to provide supplementary information about web page content, and that information only became visible when hovering your mouse over that content. This makes the title attribute inherently inaccessible to users who are using touch-only devices or assistive technologies that don't utilize a mouse. So red flag right from the get-go. We frequently see the title attribute used to add descriptive titles in images or to images in emails and portals. So while this may seem like the correct use of the title attribute, right, giving something a title, it actually can replicate the role of alt text that Nick was just speaking about and can ultimately result in a negative user experience. So in the example on the slide that we see here, each of the social icons displayed at the bottom is labeled by alt text and a title attribute. So a user interacting with this content using assistive technology would be read duplicate descriptive text for each of these icons. So essentially the equivalent of that line of icons at the bottom of the slide, we see 2 icons appearing instead of 1 with no added meaning. So even though it may seem counterintuitive, it's generally best to avoid using the title attribute in favor of alt text in order to avoid that duplicated content and kind of lack of additional meaning.
This is the example I mentioned for that first P, the practical at the onset, is thinking about how these principles apply to everybody. And so the line height example is certainly one of those. We've all been there where you're standing in the bright sunlight, trying to zoom in, increase your brightness, or just in general, a site uses very small text and maybe it's not inherently mobile responsive. Slate as a whole defaults to using pixels for line height. So you see the middle example here, if this were just standard text, it reads fine. But if somebody were to then magnify the screen, the lines start to blend together because pixels is a fixed width and height. The best practice is one of a few different things. You see here on the right, we have one example. The bare minimum gold standard is line height as a percent. So 150% would be sort of the bare minimum to achieve the standards. Now, there are other ways to accomplish this. You can use REMs or EMs. Those are even more advanced uses, but not hard to implement. And some institutions will even use 200%. So I'd say standard 150%. In general, you should be converting any line height that is currently in pixels to percentage, because as you can see, makes it easier when you zoom in. And this is something that literally everybody will encounter at some point in their life.
Okay, so char set is another important element of accessibility. It goes hand in hand with specifying the language of content that Nick discussed. And this is also something that I'm sure most of us have encountered before. So char set equals is an attribute that essentially defines the set of characters for the browser that is loading and reading off any portal or email content. Identifying that char set or character set is critical because without that attribute, a browser will not be able to identify and properly display any unique characters that are contained in your text content. So the example on this slide that we see on the left, the statement "be interested in other language" is written in Vietnamese, and you can see there are a number of unique characters that aren't present in English. Without that char set attribute, the statement in Vietnamese would be rendered essentially unreadable. The meaning would be completely lost because we would see those question marks in place of every unique character in that statement. There are 2 kind of standard char sets or character sets that we see used most frequently. This US ASCII is one, and then UTF-8 is another character set. Those are kind of the most common, and they're very easy to add in the same way that adding lang equals en is a way to make sure you're specifying the language. Adding this char set attribute will ensure that any special characters that are kind of inherent in the language you're specifying will not be lost.
For those of you who are Slate users currently, this is something you should go look at. Well, maybe not right now, maybe after the session today, but message groups in Slate. This is something that we see a number of institutions, if they ever get audited by the FTC, this is an item that we have seen institutions get fined on. The fine currently, I just looked again this morning, they raised the fine amount, is $50,120. It's very specific, but that is the current fine for this very simple thing. Go to your message groups, go to your unsubscribe organization, as you see in the middle of the screen here, and make sure that you have a physical address. Slate even tells you, typically includes organization name and physical address. 2 pieces to this. What this does is this will ensure that all of your emails have a banner at the bottom with your physical address. Our best practice is it's better to have this appear twice if you're using a template than miss it. Now, the reason this is in place, this is part of the CAN-SPAM Act that I highlighted very briefly at the beginning. And the stipulation here is that any mass marketing communication needs to have physical address. That's just federal law in the US as part of that CAN-SPAM Act through the FTC. And of course, we see institutions get fined for this. Go update this, very easy to do. Now, this is only for mass marketing email. So the sort of point to distinguish is whether or not something is mass marketing communication or it's transactional. So if you are sending an email one-on-one to a student, you don't have to worry about this. If you are sending in any emails that are transactional, such as, thanks for submitting your application, or your decision has been posted, those are not mass marketing communications. So you don't need to worry about that here. But as a general rule, it doesn't hurt to have this. It just depends on the very end of an email or text message. Include this, save yourself the hassle, the headache, and the fine.
All right. So header tags are an element that we work into HTML in the back end of our email and portal content. And these are pretty critical when you think about the general organization and flow of the content that you're delivering to your users. So header tags are elements that are used to identify the priority levels of heading text that exists in an email or on a web page, and they are very important to accessibility. The highest priority text in an email or portal, which is generally the header at the top of the page, should always be labeled by H1 tags, those carets that are opening and closing around H1s. And there should only ever be one instance of H1 tags per email or page, because anything encapsulated or included in those H1 tags represents the main subject of that entire email or page. Any subsequent header text on the page can be labeled with tags between H2 all the way to H6, and we have 6 different levels to choose from. And tags should generally correlate with the text's importance or rank on a page. So if you think you may have one kind of header 1, right, your primary context setting header for the content, and then subsections and maybe subsections within those subsections. All of those should be titled or denoted by header tags, and all of the tags should align with the rank, the importance of the text that you're trying to communicate. So you may have your one H1 tag, several H2s, and then maybe an H3 nested within those H2s. These tags make content more accessible because they really convey the importance of text on a page and the flow and cohesiveness of the page text content to users. So essentially, if you think about your text kind of cascading through header tags, that's a general kind of guide to help you make sure that you're using these elements correctly and that your content is as accessible to users as possible.
Color is a very, very fun one. And this is another topic like alt text we could spend a number of hours on. But the general principle here is color should never be the sole indicator of meaning. So you can see on the left, we have accessible color examples, on the right, non-accessible. So in the first top row there, for somebody who has red-green color blindness or any iteration thereof, if they only are given colors as the indicator of meaning, they won't be able to differentiate. So using the check mark, the X symbol as a second layer will help everybody. Additionally, color contrast. This is an easy one. Obviously, having white text on a light gray background is hard to read for just about anybody, but especially for those users who may be low-sighted. So making sure your color contrast is adequate. Typically, WCAG standards indicate at least a 4.5 to 1 ratio or 3 to 1 ratio of contrast for any bold or large text. And then we're going to come back to the example in a couple slides on links. But of course, here, you should make sure links are underlined. Again, the contrast is sufficient. So just thinking about that. There are a number of tools online for free. WebAIM, Web Accessibility in Mind, has a great free tool. I think it's just webaim.org or .com. You can put in hex codes. It'll tell you. Dylan and I each have our favorites, so we're happy to chat about those at another point. But color contrast and color is a big one.
This is one of my other favorite slides. So the concept of target size relates to the total area of a button or a clickable visual element on a page. So we can see this Slate button here. It's not very not very big, and if you were to try to one click it on your mouse or with your mouse, the likelihood of you missing that button, missing that call to action kind of embedded in the button is relatively high. So simply put, larger buttons are just easier for users to interact with. The smaller the button, the more likely your user is to accidentally miss that button or perhaps click the wrong one if you have several buttons kind of close together. Target size has become even more important to accessibility with the increased use of touchscreens on tablets and mobile phones. So imagine how difficult it would be to tap this tiny Slate button with your thumb. The average human thumb is larger than a cursor on a computer. And if the target size of a button does not make it easy to tap or to click on content, your content is not accessible to individuals who are using no touch technology or who are using cursors and mice. You risk users missing important information or the action items that are embedded in these clickable elements when your target size is not sufficiently large. So the recommended target size for buttons and clickable visual elements is no smaller than 24 pixels by 24 pixels. And this is a recommendation that you can really easily adhere to by adjusting the size of any button elements or clickable elements in the source code of your mailings and portal content. So it's a really easy fix and will instantly make your content more accessible to anyone, regardless of device that they're using or any kind of assistive technology that they're engaged with.
We get a lot of questions these days about animations, infographics, videos, GIFs. And the good news is that you can put in place any of these. They're all applicable, they're all fine to add, but you do have to think about accessibility, obviously. So the short version of this, GIFs, for example, are totally fine. If you're using a GIF, there's just two things you need to consider. First, GIFs are images, so they need alt text. But second, anything that makes motion or flashes, you need to be cautious of for users who may be epileptic or have other cognitive disabilities. So keep in mind that there are guidelines for this. Generally speaking, something shouldn't flash any more than 3 times per second. And also, it should always have the ability to deactivate or turn motion or animation off. In terms of infographics, infographics are fine. We see a lot of institutions gravitate towards this, but the nuance comes into play in that if you have a large infographic with a lot of facts, figures, and images, you're better off breaking it into several different infographics because technically you need to supply alt text for each individual one. So if you have one large infographic, you're going to run out of space for your alt text and it's going to become cumbersome. Think about shifting that to a bunch of smaller ones where you can convey meaning on an individual basis. And then finally, for videos, we mentioned earlier on the benefit of SEO work within video. So yes, if you are going to devote the time, energy, and resources to creating video, you should think about how you're going to caption that or provide a transcript, or ideally both. There are a lot of auto captioning features nowadays, especially with YouTube, and those are perfectly fine, but they should never be the sole way that you caption videos. So our best recommendation is create the video content, use an auto captioning tool, but then have a human go in and just make sure that information is conveyed the way it was intended to be.
Proximity in accessibility refers to the positioning of associated content on a page, and especially the positioning of instructional text relative to the related action. So the examples above highlight the importance of proximity in an email or in portal content, and this is one that we see really often included in materials that we are sending or displaying to prospective students. We want students to engage with us on social media, and we provide them with the links to do so. So the example on the left illustrates poor positioning and proximity. Although you may be able to visually infer the relationship between that call to action text at the top, follow us on social media, and the social media icons lower down on the page, a screen reader or other assistive technology would not necessarily be able to make that same inference given the distance between those two sections of content. Even though they're related, it's not obvious to non-sighted individuals or to devices that there is that connection. So in order to make the relationship between content clearer and to help our users complete the action that they're being prompted to take, email and portal content should be arranged to closely mirror the example on the right here. So the instructional text, follow us on social media, is clearly positioned over and near its related content. So the action is easier to infer kind of the location of the action that individuals should be taking.
Thinking back now to color, just a couple quick notes on text links. We see this one quite a bit. This is also easy to update. There are 3 things incorrect or out of code on the left-hand side. We're really excited to show you our majors and minors. Click here versus the right side. So first, obviously, is the color contrast. That lightish yellow on the white background is tough. So that cyan color on the right is a much better choice for contrast. Second, the use of the underline. You should always be underlining your links. That just allows somebody who maybe can't distinguish the color contrast to actually infer, oh, this is a link. I can click on that. And then finally, the language here is very important. We really discourage anybody from using language such as click here or this link, for example. Those don't convey any meaning. Use the links in the actual content. So here on the right side, this follows all 3 of those principles. We're really excited to show you our link to majors and minors.
Okay, so keyboard functionality, this is one of the most important aspects of web accessibility. Users with motor disabilities or visual impairments may rely heavily on their keyboards to navigate and interact with content in emails and web pages. So this kind of short clip that you see as Nick toggles back and forth illustrates what keyboard navigation can often look like from the user interface side of things. So you'll notice that little black border on the top and left of those links that travels from element to element as the user tabs through the page. This type of visual representation of position is really critical to helping your users interact with and stay oriented within any content that you're serving to them. Forms in Slate inherently accommodate keyboard navigation, so that's one area that we don't have to kind of worry about this element too much, but you are able to customize the look and feel of the user experience in emails and portals using this Focus CSS class, which you can see on the slide here. You're easily able to add that into the source of your content to change or adjust the way that users see content highlighted as they move through the page. Something to note, you may need to include that highlighted exclamation point important. That will help you override any focus styling that's inherent to your Slate instance branding. But this is something that you do have a little bit of control over if you'd like to customize it. Additionally, making sure that your header structure follows the correct order in your content will also facilitate keyboard-only navigation, as it highlights the priority text that a user will move through as they tab through the content in your email or your portal. Yeah, we'll pass it to Nick for some empathy exercises now.
Perfect. And we just want to give the opportunity for folks to be able to build a little bit of empathy for folks who need to use some of these tools. So if we had actual workshop time, we would go through these. So feel free to take a screenshot of this page. The QR code goes with the 3rd example. Try these out. These are meant to be frustrating. That's the point of them. But just to give you just to read them through. Empathy exercise 1. From your desktop on your computer, without using your mouse or trackpad, navigate to Amazon and change the default language from English to any other language, Spanish, for example. In a second, close one eye and with the other look through a drinking straw. From there, navigate to the Wikipedia article on Denver International Airport and tell me which 2 cities Lufthansa flies to. Third is my favorite. Watch the video linked with the QR code, write a summary, and send me your summary. I'd love to hear what you come up with for that. Our emails will be on the last slide. And then 4th, in a new Word document, word processing file, and without using your hands or fingers, change the font to Garamond or your favorite font and type out your full name. Again, no hands, no fingers. So take a screenshot, let us know how you do. These are meant to be frustrating, just to give you a little bit of context in terms of what a lot of people encounter every day on the web.
Okay, thank you all for sticking with us through a lot of in-depth content. I know there was a lot that we covered. We'd love to spend some time answering any questions that you may have brought to this session or that may have been sparked as you saw some of the topics that Nick and I covered. I know we have a decent amount of time, so we'll turn it over to some Q&A.
Perfect. As folks enter in some of those questions into the Q&A section in Whova, during your session, there was one section about essentially different elements, title elements in H1. So Victoria asks, can you explain the difference between title elements and H1s? Why have both if they both indicate subject?
That's a great question. The title element, let me think about how exactly I want to distinguish between the two. Um, the title element serves more to provide general context, overall context, for the page or the email that the user is um, about to kind of engage with. And the H1 tags or the header elements serve to distinguish different blocks of text from each other, and to really kind of emphasize the flow or the priority of all header text within the page. So like I mentioned, you may have kind of one primary header text that sets more of the kind of subject for the portal or the email that the student is engaging with or the audience is engaging with. But you may have other heading text that's just a little less important or kind of it's nested within the page. And so having all of 6 kind of header tag options gives you the ability to indicate this is kind of the primary header text we want you to pay attention to first. And now here's the next section, header 2. If there's information that's nested between or kind of below a header 2, you might indicate that with a header 3. So header tags generally just give you a little bit more flexibility or kind of give you more of an ability to indicate the importance of the content that's within your entire email or web page.
Perfect. Appreciate that, Dylan. Also during the middle portion, another attendee asked, do the red and green check marks in the portal checklist adhere to ADA guidelines?
That is a good question. We generally, I have a lot of feelings about the kind of the Slate delivered checklist in portals. Nick, do you know the answer to this question? I will say when I build portals, I don't use that checklist widget. Nick, do you know more about this?
It's a great question. I also love the question. So the red X and the green check mark are in compliance, but we've had issues. I know there's also a gray icon. It's either an X or a lock symbol in some cases. The gray one is not in compliance. I do believe there is a way through the branding editor or the file editor to update what those show as, but usually the green check mark, the red X are sufficient. If you're using anything else than that, you might use the web AIM tool, web accessibility in mind, just to check the hex values because some of those may not be, but you can update them as far as I know.
Yeah, I will say the branding editor, even though that tool is kind of finicky sometimes, that can be one of your bigger assets when adjusting the overall accessibility of your Slate instance.
Perfect. Sincerely appreciate that. I didn't see any more questions come in. So Nick and Dylan, appreciate the great conversation and helping this content be more accessible to more people. As we depart today, are there any closing words or comments that you'd like to say to our attendees?
Thank you, everybody. I mean, our emails are here. I'll let Adam walk through the slide, but if anybody's interested, there's a lot of great resources online that we'd be happy to chat about as well. I think there's one person who works in this industry is her name is Sean. She works with the W3C organization, and she has a really great phrase: is that thinking about accessibility is really an act of enlightened self-interest. Is because everything that we're doing, you never know someday when you might be impacted by these things. So really taking the empathetic approach, I always find is the best for folks. And we're just grateful for you all for joining us today. But Dylan, anything from your end?
No, I would just echo everything that you said, Nick. Thank you all for joining us and for digging into this topic. It is important not just for individuals who struggle with disabilities or use assistive technologies, right? As Nick mentioned, this benefits all of us. So hopefully you're going to walk away from this session with a couple of ideas and immediately jump into your Slate instances and make some of these easier changes, right? That we highlighted a couple that are really quick fixes, and we hope that you feel empowered to go in and start adding some accessibility work to your Slate instance.
Yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate both your expertise in this. I encourage everybody, if you have questions or comments, to please pass those along. And that kind of concludes our session here today. But next up at the Connection Conference is actually from the source itself, as Technolutions talks through data-driven transformation, catalyzing student success in higher education, directly after this at 11 o'clock Eastern. Again, appreciate everybody's attendance and questions today. And please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone.